So, by classic, we just mean multiple. Development is able to change just because were maybe born with something doesn't mean that it is a guaranteed life. It's not guaranteed that that's how you're gonna remain for the rest of your life. You can change, you can mold. We Obviously your behavior exists based on things that have happened to you in the past, but how you perceive these things, how you act and react, how you let it affect you, if you choose to get help or not after, there's so many things that can kind of change the way that we perceive something going forward. So just also something to think about. You're not doomed to be one way or another. We are able to change and grow based on any number of nurture elements. So what's happening in our environment. There are many developmental theories of human development. Over the next several slides, I think we're going to look at several of the more popular theories that have kind of stood the test of time here. So Sigmund Freud developed the psychoanalytic theory. He really feels that most all of how we grow and develop it is occurring during the first 6 years of our life across 3 different stages. Each of those stages is characterized by sexual pleasure, focused on a particular part of the body. You can see more detail on this in table 1.4 in your book. A lot of what Freud focused on was sexual and aggressive urges. And it has stood the test of time. Obviously, a lot of what he has said and argued has been more or less debunked, but a lot of what he does say, about the unconscious mind has really, it's hard to dispute. So I think that's why he's still so commonly discussed in development. So Erik Erikson felt that we went through 8 stages throughout the lifespan rather than just the first 6 years. He did add some adult stages. He really felt like each stage is defined by a crisis, and then how you kind of come out of that crisis kind of then shapes how you are going forward. So like in the first stage, he talks about trust versus mistrust. So that's in the first year of life. So the only way you interact with and explore the world in that first year of life is through other people and their contact with you. Are you having your basic needs met on a consistent basis? If you are, you might develop trust, warmth, all these things. But if you don't have that, if it's a real struggle to get those basic needs met, food, being clean, all these things, then you may develop a mistrust about your care. So he kind of breaks that down through the different age stages. That's also in table 1.4 in your book. Behaviorism is a theory of learning that can break down into 3 different types: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and modeling. Basically, we learn through observing behavior. That could be through, physically watching someone and then modeling what they do. It could be through consequences, which would be more of the operant conditioning. You kind of weigh the consequences, good or bad. And then classical conditioning, where you kind of become used to something. I always think of my cats with classical conditioning as she's sitting right here playing with a pin. But anytime we're getting ready to leave the house, my cat sees, oh, you're getting ready to leave, so it must be time for me to get some treats. So they kind of get into place and react based on that. We do it the same as humans. If something happens and it's happening at the same time and place every day, we kind of become conditioned to that. And we kind of expect, if this always happens, I'm going to continue to expect this to happen going forward. And that can be with any number of things in life. Ivan Pavlov is arguably the most famous person to talk about behaviorism and learning, who was not a psychologist, but he really discovered classical conditioning. He studied the digestive processes of dogs, and in fact won a Nobel Prize for that. But started noticing that the dogs would start salivating before their food would come. So he listened a little closer, and there was footsteps. You could hear the footsteps coming down the hall. Footsteps meant food. So he designed an experiment to see if this was actually the case, if they were learning from this. And so he used a bell. Well, he didn't actually use the bell, but we talk about him using a bell. He used like a time fork, I think. But anyhow, he rang the bell and then presented the food, and to see if the dogs would eventually start salivating. And they did. And so he spent the next 30 years kind of studying classical conditioning, what can reinforce this behavior, what takes away from that behavior. And so it's a really interesting line of work. You've probably heard about classical conditioning if you've taken other psychology classes, so I won't belabor it, but if you're interested, certainly look it up. You could write one of your extra credit papers on that, whatever would be interesting for you. B.F. Skinner also studied conditioning. He mostly did operant conditioning. So I kind of was talking about this earlier. I'm kind of looking for the consequences. Is there a punishment? Is there a reward? I'm going to keep acting on something based on what my expectations are. I think of operant conditioning a lot in like elementary school. They give like gold stars, and if you get so many gold stars, you get like a prize at the end of the week. I think now they do like a red, yellow, and green situation. Just really probably depends on the school system. But my niece, on her first day of school, first day ever, she's in kindergarten, okay, they gave her a red star, meaning she was bad, and because she didn't listen or something. And this is the first day of school, and she gets their red star. They told her that she was bad, and they went home to her parent. And then the next day she came home with a red star, and her mom was like, "What's the deal?" And she's like, "Well, I'm not going to try because I was bad the first time. I'm obviously a bad kid." It was really like detrimental to hear, but it's really this operant conditioning process. She had learned that if she had done this one action, she was bad. So she just assumed that is how she was always going to be. So she's going to continue that behavior. And that was just who she was destined to be. She's in, I think, second grade now, and she's doing great. But it was a really interesting learning experience to see that. And this is the same. If you wear a shirt and someone makes fun of it, you maybe are less likely to wear that shirt in the future because you don't want another person making fun of you. So there's just a million ways we can talk about operant conditioning. I'm more likely to go to work every day if I know that I'm getting a paycheck at the end of the week. Many things are really fall under this operant conditioning model. Social learning theory, so this is the modeling I was talking about. You basically, we learn a lot through imitation. They started out, the studies that Albert Bandura was doing were the Bobo doll studies, where he had kids watching adults hitting like a bouncy doll, and then he'd see if the kids would repeat that behavior. If there was no punishment, the kids would of course do the same, sometimes even worse. It was just they were repeating that behavior. The same thing now, currently, I think it's the easiest example. Have you ever watched a YouTube video to learn how to do something? That would be an example of social learning. They have YouTube videos on, from what I understand, basically everything. You can learn how to make food. You can learn how to braid hair a certain way. You can learn anything. The car things, I know. You can learn how to turn off. People have videos about how to turn off alarms on the cars. I mean, just so many things. You literally, probably anything you can think of, you can learn that way. So we're learning by observation, by imitation, by modeling. How to act in a certain social situation. If it's new to us, we're probably looking around, kind of watching what other people are doing. All of these things are part of social learning theory.